to the district house. I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces. It's good to see you all in the space. My name is Hannah Jo, and today I will be interviewing Chief Phillip Scott, and he is visiting us from the Bay Area and beyond. Thank you for coming here to visit us today.
Pleasure to be with you today. Thank you.
Is there any expanded title that you're wanting to share for the many hats that you wear? I know author, advocate, speaker, ceremonialist are a few.
Well, I think I'm pretty content with, I think the appropriate moniker is, ceremonial chief and leader. And I am a founder and director of Ancestral Voice, which is the Institute for Indigenous Lifeways, which is located in the San Francisco Bay Area. And we are celebrating our 30th year anniversary this year.
That's amazing. And I look forward to better understanding the Institute and what it involves. And so today we will be receiving some song, prayer, and insightful story that will come through you in a moment. And then we'll regroup for a little bit of dialogue before we open it up to the audience. Is there anything else you want to say before I transition and give you space to flow?
Well, we are preparing for a solar eclipse. And so the ceremony that we will be conducting tonight is in preparation and observance of this unique and rare phenomenon that is occurring on Monday.
Beautiful. I love that you're weaving with that, and I look forward to receiving your ceremony. I'm going to transition, and I'll see you back.
Very good. Thank you. So, good evening, relations. And I say relative because we are all connected. And so I'm very honored that this district has invited me to share a little bit of my way of life with each and every one of you here, as well as for our other audience members who are not physically present with us, but who are going to be watching from afar in the weeks to come. I am going to start by saying my ceremonial name, which is Shunkawa Kansapa, which is Lakota for black horse. And I am a ceremonial leader in the Lakota tradition, as well as a respected member of traditional medicine families throughout North America. Many different nations have adopted me, and we employ the sacrament peyote in our ceremonies, as well as the sacrament of tobacco. And I'll explain some of these a little bit later. However, before we discuss and address sacred matters, it's essential for us to invoke the ancestors. So I'm going to kindly request that, again, your phones have been completely turned off, as I've been hit 3 times by lightning, and I'm very sensitive to electrical disturbances in the field. And also, if you want to make sure that you preserve and protect your data, otherwise it can be wiped from your phone. Also, I kindly ask if you are not wearing a hat that comes from your faith tradition, if you can remove it, because we're going to be opening ourselves up to the presence of the holy ones, the ancestors. And so the way that we do that is through song and through prayer. And, if any parents in the audience here, anyone who has children, right, if you do, when you have an infant, you see that the pulsing, the top of the head, that fontanelle, right? And so that fontanelle allows for a direct transmission of the ancestors, that communication from the spirit world into the infant. And as we grow, I say we adulterate ourselves because those plates fuse together. And there is a juncture, right, at that place where those plates fuse together, and you can actually feel it on the top of your head. And so by removing the cap or the hat that you wear, it allows for a unobstructed transmission of that energy. So with that, I'm going to commence with a cleansing of the space. I'm going to use a little bit of sage that has been harvested in a sacred manner with prayers and offerings. This particular sage comes from South Dakota, from where my family on the Pine Ridge is from. And so we will acknowledge the ancestors and invoke the spirits, because in my understanding and my tradition, we don't hold sacred space. we all occupy space. And what we do is we invite the ancestors to come. They are the ones who hold the space and create the container for the healing and the transformation to take place. So with that, I'm going to stand and invite the ancestors in. My altar, we commence with the west. Hold out your palms for me. Bless each and every one of you as well. And again, I prefer no video other than well, now that we have invited the holy ones to be with us, and we have articulated our intention as to the reason and the purpose for their presence here, now we can speak of sacred matters. Indigenous medicine is the most ancient form of healing on this planet. And let's be clear, everyone in this room has intrinsic indigeneity within you. Regardless of where you've come from on this planet, you had ancestors who cultivated a relationship, a sacred, holy covenant with the earth, with the unseen, with the ancestors. And unfortunately, in the journey of colonization, there's been a fundamental forgetting of that indigeneity. And as a consequence, we're suffering. But not only ourselves, but our very Earth Mother is suffering. Right? And so it's important that we begin the process of decolonization. We need to decolonize so that we can remember and honor our ancestors who had that connection that I spoke of. Because it's actually vital for our survival. Because we're running out of time. Right? This fundamental forgetting that we have has created an unsustainable trajectory. And if we don't arrest this, it's going to cause us to perish, and we're going to take many species along with us. Right? To be clear, our mother, the earth, is a sentient, self-regulating organism. She's going to outlive us. Civilizations have come and civilizations have gone. But the reality is, the question we need to ask ourselves is, what's our legacy for future generations? Are we going to saddle our children and their children's children with this onus, with this burden? Or are we going to wake up and assume responsibility for the actions that we have undertaken that have been not so wise and begin to ameliorate them, change them? Not in 2030, not in 2050, which is what the projection is, but now. We need to act now. And this applies not only to the earth in this unsustainable trajectory, but it applies, for example, to what we're here to talk about tonight, which is sacraments. Right? In this incessant consumptive disease that we have, many of our plant medicines, sacred plant medicines, are now under siege. Right? Not so much the fungi, right, which are quite prolific, but many of the other sacraments because we employ that word rather than psychedelics or entheogens, right? Those are Western classifications and monikers. But for us, our sacred plant medicines are the sacraments and the fungi, right? But primarily the former are being over-harvested now, which also creates unsustainability. So tonight I was also going to address reciprocity, which will be later in the talk. It's important that we not only talk about, but walk reciprocity, right? In general, we have to stop talking and start walking, right? When we walk our talk, that's what we call integrity, right? And we need to begin to cultivate much greater integrity as a species, right? Because we often say things, but we often don't follow through with our intentions and our words. And so therefore it becomes anemic, right? But the reality is if you breach your word and break your integrity with others, you engender distrust, right? And that distrust then begins to percolate through our society. And we see that also happening, quite profoundly throughout the world. So indigenous medicine is the most ancient form of healing on the planet. And it's potent, it's effective, it has very specific and exacting protocols, right? Ceremonial medicine is actually more rigorous than the guidelines and protocols of allopathic medicine. The foundation of indigenous medicine is prayer, just like that's how we commenced our gathering here, through song and prayer, because that sets the intention, which then allows the spirits and the ancestors to hear what it is that we're asking of them, for which then they can either accommodate us or not. Ultimately, it's their will, right? They determine, right, the outcome, not ourselves, right? So that's why, medicine people cultivate an intimate, abiding relationship with their helping spirits, right? Because it's not the medicine person that holds the space. They occupy the space as well, but they have called in the spirits of their altar, their family's lineage. They communicate with the spirits, so the spirits hold the space and create the container. And the medicine person is responsible for monitoring that space, ensuring that the ancestors remain. In addition to prayer is song that I sang. We have many songs and very rigorous protocols that have to be followed in terms of the ceremonial use of plant medicines, which is why it's often troubling for many indigenous people to see what's transpiring in the Western world vis-a-vis psychedelics and entheogens. Because oftentimes these containers are not being held by the ancestors, right? Which creates the potential for harm, right? If there's not a clear intent with these sacraments, right? So that's why it takes years and years of apprenticeship and training to become qualified, just like a medical doctor, right? This is what we find fascinating, that, in terms of identification, right? That if I ask how many medical doctors are in this space, if you are qualified, board licensed, then you'll raise your hand, right? If you're not a medical doctor, you won't raise your hand. But indigenous ways are medicine ways, which require equal training. And yet, if I ask how many shamans are in the room, for example, sometimes, and we'll talk about shamanism in a moment, how many shamans are in the room, or how many, sacred plant medicine practitioners, got a whole bunch of people raising their hands. But without the training, right? Which moves into the arena of appropriation, which is a very sensitive topic for indigenous people, right? It requires at least 10 years of rigorous apprenticeship and training to become a traditional medicine person, which is very similar to modern medicine as well, right? To become a physician, right? 4 years of schooling, academics, then you've got your residencies and your rotations, right? And maybe even more specialization, so 8 to 10 years, right? Well, we have that same training to become a traditional medicine person, right? Although rather than, in the context of academia, or, in hospital context, we have ceremonies that take you to the brink of life and death and back, right? That's why I'm saying it's equally arduous and rigorous, and actually can cost you your life sometimes, right? So that you become familiar with the landscape of life and death, right? So, sacraments are also sentient beings. We call them elders and teachers. They're extremely generous and very wise, and that's why we rely upon them, right? So there's this notion in the West that human beings are the zenith of creation. And that's not how it operates in native country, right? Human beings, and this is, if we look at all of the origin stories throughout the world, including Western stories, human beings are the last to be created, not the first. So technically, we are the grandchildren here, right? And so we therefore have the most to learn. And so indigenous cultures look to their elders for wisdom and guidance and counsel on how to live in balance on this life, in this life, on this earth, right? So your first elders are the elementals: earth, air, fire, water. That's why I requested a candle here with an actual fire, because we address this being as grandfather fire, right? So this is a living entity, a being, right? In California, they actually have what are known as cultural burns, right? They know how to manage the landscape properly, right? Wildfires didn't exist back then because they were, again, communicating with the natural world. They were ensuring all of the trees that had, passed their life, because there's a half-life with trees as well. They were calling these trees from the forests here, ensuring that, they were after the winter time, that they would burn with these cultural burns. The fire would ensure that there would not be contamination in the soil, so that the oaks, for example, would not receive this disease that is currently plaguing them. There was this wisdom and this understanding about that, right? So grandfather fire, right? Grandmother water. Water is a sentient living being. She carries memory. Fire, earth, air, water, 4.8 billion years old. The oldest elders that we have on this planet. And we look to them always for guidance and counsel. That's why in our ceremonies we have that fire. We have that holy medicine, the first medicine, right? The medicine of water that we are suspended in. We listen to the air, to the wind, right? Carries our voice and our prayers. All of these beings, we look to them for counsel. We look to them for wisdom. The next iteration of evolution, on this planet are the viruses and the bacteria and the mycelial network, right? The great brain, if you will, the nervous system of the earth, right? One virus stopped human beings for 2 long years. That's how powerful that virus is, right? And that virus came to teach us something which we've forgotten already, right? In our quest to go back to status quo, we've forgotten some of the teachings that the virus was endeavoring to transmit, right? So viruses, bacteria, the mycelium, that's the next iteration from the elementals. Right? Then come plant nations, sacraments, right? Sacred plant medicines, as well as all of the plant nations on this earth. They are our elders as well. And finally, our animal relations. Right? All of these beings are here to guide us when we're humble enough to learn. But if we regard ourselves as the zenith and pinnacle of creation, we're not going to heed their counsel. And that's why we are in the predicament that we're in now, right? This crisis that we are finding ourselves. But I'm not going to harp on the reality of our circumstances, but how we can, again, affect change, right? How each and every one of us can ensure that there is going to be a livable, viable earth for future generations, right? And the way that we do that is through work, okay? From sleep to illumination is just one word, work. And that work means inner work, not the work of our livelihoods and our professions and how we engender money. That's not the kind of work I'm talking about. I'm talking about the kind of work that looks at ourselves and the healing that we need to do, of which ceremonies, sacraments, and as well as the psychedelic therapeutic contexts, which I'm not dismissing here, okay, just to be clear. All of it is going to have value, right? Because there's going to be individuals that may never find themselves in an all-night sacramental ceremony with me. And that's okay, right? We need to work together. This is about solidarity and cooperation and respect, right? But that inner work means delving deep into the wounding and the pain and the suffering that all of us have intergenerationally, right? Now, I asked the spirits, why are we here? I'm not important, so I wouldn't say, why am I here? But why are we here? It was in the ceremony. And this is what the spirits and the ancestors share with me. They said, when mystery merges with matter, you come into human form. You incarnate. At the moment of that incarnation, you're bequeathed two bundles. A burden bundle and a blessing bundle. And inside that blessing bundle are all the gifts, talents, and attributes of your families of origin, both maternal and paternal. But you also have a burden bundle. And inside this burden bundle are all the pain, wounds, fears, traumas, issues, patterns, and addictions of those lineages. And as you gain the gift of language and mobility, these bundles burst open. And you get a chance to see all the beauty in that blessing bundle that has been bequeathed to you from your families. But you also see the darkness. You also see that which is not so favorable. But that's the grist for the mill. So perhaps a time comes in your life when enough is enough. You're not going to continue to carry this onus of your family. And that's when the work begins. That's when healing occurs, which is not comfortable. Right? You know, people talk about safety. That's a big buzzword now within the psychedelic therapeutic community. If you're going to work with plant medicines, sacraments and ceremonies, you're not going to be safe. You won't be. Again, the safety of the container is actually the security of the ancestors holding that space for you to dive deep into that pain, which is uncomfortable and which is not safe. And so the endeavor is to utilize these healing modalities to extract one or two of the items from that burden bundle. Will you be able to extract all of it in one journey of life? Absolutely not. Because that burden bundle we all carry. So this whole conflict of nature and nurture doesn't make any sense to me. You have DNA, right? That's the intergenerational memory. The great activist and poet John Trudell, Lakota, said DNA is descendant, now ancestors, not just deoxyribonucleic acid, right? So inside that legacy, inside that memory, is the genetic pain and suffering. But generally what you're going to be working on is a part of your environment, right? If you grew up in an addictive environment, that's probably what you're going to be grappling with and attempting to extract from that bundle. With the objective being that when either you have your own children or you become a mentor to others, you want the blessing bundle to be bigger and the burden bundle to be smaller. Because if everybody does their work, generationally as time goes on, that bundle is going to shrink. And it means less burden for our children and future generations, which will be a very different world in which we dwell. Yeah? Does that make sense? Yeah. So that's why we utilize sacraments, right? That's what these ceremonies are for. These ceremonies are for healing, for doctoring, right? It's the spirit of the plant that heals, not the chemical moiety. It's not mescaline. It's the spirit of the whole plant, right? Otherwise, when we extract the moiety, we create the potential for iatrogenesis, right? So therefore, adverse side effects, and then we're using other pharmaceuticals ad nauseum, literally, right? So we have these side effects from taking this pharmaceutical, right? And again, I am not dismissing the merits of certain pharmaceutical interventions either, okay, to be clear. However, when it comes to sacraments, it's the spirit of the plant that heals, not just the chemical moiety that's often being extracted in a lab, right? Because when you isolate, you take it out of context, it's no longer systemic, right? It becomes something that's isolated and therefore disconnected, right? So that's why in our ceremonies, traditional ceremonies, it's the whole plant that we're using, right? Not just the extract, if you will. And so we are utilizing these ceremonies and these sacraments for deep healing. But to be clear, for indigenous peoples, there's no renaissance going on. I know in the West it is. That's what it's called. It's a psychedelic renaissance. For indigenous peoples, there is no renaissance because they've never been disconnected from these plant medicines. And they have for thousands of years been continuing these ceremonies. Yeah. And so my request and my deep desire is that the current state of psychedelic therapies and the entheogenic focus includes the voice and the perspective of indigenous people because they've been at this for thousands of years. And their counsel can be invaluable in this wild west of what's happening right now. Because there's nothing that's standardized, right? Everyone is kind of creating their own rules, right? And that can be disastrous as well, you know? If there isn't that ceremonial container, or more importantly, you know, consulting with indigenous people that can find a meaningful ritual that is respectful, that isn't going to be bordering or directly appropriating from indigenous people, right? So we're talking about consent, right? We're talking about permission, right? So that we can all have that respect, right? And that's been my advocacy, is to ask indigenous peoples to be a part of the conversation, right? To receive that help from them and that invaluable guidance, right? Which also brings me to reciprocity, right? So it's not about just throwing money at indigenous people. Because that's kind of been, when I go to some of these psychedelic therapeutic conferences, that's really what they're talking about. That once they make their cool million, then there'll be a percentage that is given to them as kind of like a token of appreciation. But that means they're still excluded until the profit has been made, right? So what I'm talking about in terms of reciprocity is allyship, right? Indigenous people, as we speak, are being marginalized, right? The same challenges of genocide they're still grappling with. For example, right now, they haven't learned their lesson from Standing Rock. There is now a pipeline that's being rerouted through the sacred lands of Pipestone, Minnesota, right? That's happening right now. That never gets any press, no media attention, right? But what I'm referring to is the fundamental disrespect of indigenous peoples. And so for the psychedelic therapy movement, they can actually be assisting other people to understand the plight of indigenous people, right? The challenges that they face. To give back in allyship, to ensure that there is a support for their self-determination, their way of life, the preservation of their language, culture, identity, etc. Right? In addition to the reciprocity that I think should be afforded to indigenous nations, what about the reciprocity directly to the plant nations? Rather than the consumptive model that we currently have, the cooperative one of giving back, right? So that there are peyote initiatives amongst indigenous peoples to protect the gardens where the peyote grows. Maybe there's the financial support to ensure that those conservation corps are ensuring that they have enough financial support to acquire the seeds, to acquire the land, to continue, to plant these medicines. Because for grandfather peyote, it takes 7 years for 1 inch to grow. Very slow growing medicine, right? Grandmother Aya, exactly the same, right? That they project that in not too long, the ayahuasca is going to disappear at this current rate of consumption. So, again, to give back in reciprocity to the plant nations, by ensuring that those that are entrusted with protecting the plants have the resources they require, or the people power, meaning individuals show up to help with the planting of the medicine, right? Right. This goes with iboga, right? Same thing with combo with the toad, right? The toads are being massacred, right? All for the sake of that experience, right? But the reality, the difference is, for indigenous peoples, it's a way of life. It's not just an experience to have on the weekends, right? And it's also done in moderation, right? So indigenous peoples aren't doing, ayahuasca every weekend, right? Grandfather peyote is not being done every weekend by the same individual. Because I said, these plant medicines are generous, wise teachers. And they're going to be providing directives. There are instructions that are given to the individual, which it's incumbent upon that individual to complete. So if you go back to the medicine and you haven't completed the directives, you're disrespecting the elder there. You're disrespecting the plant because you haven't finished the assignment, right? You're also disrespecting indigenous peoples who often don't even have enough of the medicine because it's being taken elsewhere, sometimes by people that aren't qualified to take the medicine to these and distribute it, right? It happens a lot on the res. Don't even have enough medicine to be able to conduct the ceremony. Yet they show up anyway because they sing and they pray with the spirit of that medicine if it's not physically present. So that's the other spirit of reciprocity here, right? Not only to give back to indigenous nations and support them in their endeavors to protect their way of life, we're also talking about reciprocity toward the plant medicines themselves. So that there can be the experience of our children's children with this medicine as well, right? Which means that we have to stop the myopia, right? To stop the vision that's so narrow, right? Thinking only about ourselves, right? We have to let go of self-absorption as a species, right? And begin to see, right? So the vision is 7 generations and beyond, right? It's from the great law of peace of the Iroquois nation, from the 6 nations on the East Coast, and the great law of peace. And part of that was the understanding that our words and our conduct must be seen for 7 generations and beyond. So we are thinking about the children that we will never even see on this earth, right? That's the kind of eagle vision, as I call it, the kind of foresight that we require, right? Then we're taking care of this planet and all beings on this planet, right? So we're getting ready for an eclipse, a solar eclipse, a unique phenomenon, right? So I just don't want to talk about healing tonight. I want us to walk it, right? So when we have eclipses, whether lunar or solar, the question is, what's eclipsing you? What darkness is preventing your illumination from radiating? And that darkness is in what I'm talking about with the bundle, right? All of that is what eclipses your luminosity, right? And each and every one of you has intergenerational trauma. Each and every one of you has challenges within your family dynamics, because relationship is the ground of existence. You are born into a family. You are born into a community. You're born into and onto the earth. And so all of our challenges come from our relationships, right? Starting with that crucible of the family. I have a saying, I'll turn it in probably to a bumper sticker, it says, nuclear families create nuclear explosions. Yeah. There's a reason why Indigenous people live in a community where you're often raised not by your biological parents, but by your grandparents and your aunties and your uncles. They understood that you have to spread the network for that soul to grow. Otherwise, there's too much insularity, there's too much projection, there's too much enmeshment. So the crucible of our wounding is our families of origin. And it percolates from there, right? So each and every one of you may be grappling with something in your life right now, right? Personally. We're not going to work on the global issue right now. We're going to make it personal, right? Each and every one of you has some kind of challenge in your life at the moment. I trust that you know what that is, that you can track that within yourself, right? So I'm going to ask you to take your hand to your heart, right? In the Lakota tradition, we have a word called wochekia. Wochekia means to cry. And wochekia is prayer, right? When we pray, we often weep, right? For me, prayer is what I call unfettered heart speak. You open your heart and you let the words issue forth like a fountain. And oftentimes that can engender tears to flow from your eyes. Yeah. So I'm going to sing a song that's going to ask the spirits to listen to you, right? And I'm going to ask you all to get real with yourselves, right? To get honest, right? What are you grappling with right now, right? And to give that to the spirits, right? As I sing, you can softly just speak aloud and articulate what those challenges are, so you discharge them, you release them from your body. You're going to get the spirits that are here present with the song that I called in and the prayers that I articulated. They're here. And as you give voice to them, they will take them from you. That's the doctoring. That's why medicine people don't take credit for a healing. They understand the spirits are doing the doctoring. Yeah? The plant medicines are doing the doctoring. So, therefore, speak aloud your challenges and your truth, right? while I sing this song, right, for you, and let it go. Release it, right? If the tears come, fine. If they don't, that's all right, right? No pressure, right? But give yourself an opportunity to let go tonight. So that whatever is eclipsing your life and your challenges can now be released to allow more of that illumination to take place. Feel that release. Go ahead and hold up your hands. I'm just going to bless you with this feather again. Feeling lighter? Yes? No? Yeah. Good. So now you've released something, right? That which has been eclipsing your radiance and your luminosity. Now we need to invite something in, right? We need to invite in the blessings, right? Now that you are emptier, we can call in more light, more blessings, more goodness, more balance, more healing for yourself and your loved ones, right? So, one of the sacraments that we use is tobacco, right? Tobacco is one of the chief medicine plants of North America. In fact, with all the other ceremonies, usually tobacco is what sets the precedent, right? Because tobacco is a visible prayer, right? I call it smoke signal from my heart to the universe, right? And so the medicine of prayer, right, when it's used properly, right, and I'm not talking about inhaling, right? You don't inhale, right? You send it out. It's called sending smoke, right? I've been working with tobacco for 40 years. I have no desire to smoke it outside of ceremony ever, right? Because you're never going to abuse something that you respect, right? And so we're going to send some smoke here today, right? And the way that we're going to do that is you're going to infuse into the tobacco that I will offer to you what you desire for yourself, for your loved ones, for your family, for your friends, for this world, for the water protectors, the earth protectors, the fire protectors, right? The elemental protectors. Prayers for the cessation of all wars in this world, for the suffering of the children, the women, the elders, our very earth herself. I look at the photographs of all of these areas where war is occurring, and I see wounds and scars of my mother, the earth. Right? We, as my Lakota mother would say, we have a lot to pray for. Yeah. And prayer works when we put moccasins on our prayers, right? It's not enough just to pray, but then we act on the prayers that we articulate, right? So we can make those changes, right? For ourselves, right? That's what I'm saying. When those sacraments give you directives, you need to comply, right? Because they're there to help us to heal. So if we ignore them, we're disrespecting the plants. We're also harming ourselves, because those plant medicines and those spirits, they want to help us because they see what we're doing. And they love us. And they want this earth to continue to prevail, with themselves upon it and all of us upon it as well. So, with these songs that I was talking about, in the song is the medicine, right? So when we sing peyote songs, even if we don't have any of that actual medicine present that we've ingested, it's in the vibration of the song, because Grandfather Peyote shared these songs with the people to be sung in the ceremony. So when I sing these songs, you feel the medicine of Grandfather inside of you. It shifts you. just like with the drum, right? As of now, scientists don't comprehend why the drum is so profound at shifting our awareness. And yet I can share with you what the drum has imparted to me, which is that when all of us were suspended in the amnion of our biological mothers, we were hearing the heartbeat of our mother. The drum is regarded from indigenous nations as the heartbeat of Mother Earth. So when you hear the heartbeat of Mother Earth in that drum, it transports you back to the time when you were suspended in the biological mother's womb, hearing her heartbeat and connected to where you came from, which was the spirit world at the same time. So you are launched with that drum back to the spirit world in that original remembrance, in that 9-moon gestation. So when we use our rattle and we sing those peyote songs, you can feel that medicine dancing inside of you, helping you, moving you, right? Moving the prayer inside of you for the life that you dream and desire for yourself and your loved ones. Yeah. So tonight, I'm going to use this medicine, this tobacco. This is different tobacco, right? So the tobacco that is manufactured in corporations that want to make a profit, that's not even tobacco, really. That's poison, right? It's infused with chemicals and other things to increase its addictiveness. And each one of those cigarette companies has their own specific formula so that you continue to go back to their brand, right? Whereas this medicine here tonight is from the indigenous people. It's pure tobacco, nothing else. So it does not harm you. It actually helps you through that visible prayer that I am mentioning, which you will infuse into this tobacco by directing your own prayers for yourself. So once again, I ask you to take your hand to your heart, right? Because that helps us, right? When we put our hand to our heart, helps us to drop into our heart and stay out of our head, right? So, this isn't a recitation of a prayer from a book. This is you articulating your heart to the spirits, to the earth, to the holy ones, to the Creator. So, the great mystery, however you address the ineffable and the unseen. And ask for prayers for yourself. What is it that you truly desire in your life? What do you want to manifest, right, at this time? Now that we have removed that which is eclipsing our light, how do we allow our light to shine, right? What is it that you desire or aspire to dream and manifest in this world for the betterment of all of us, right? Please include prayers for District 216 so that this place can continue to flourish, right? I'm deeply grateful to be here. Thank you for this invitation and this honoring, right? It means a lot to me, right? To be able to come and share my way of life with you, right? To touch you in some way that you can take this out into the world, right? And share the good feelings that you have here tonight, right? And I do pray that this district will, really flourish and more people will be magnetized for the good heart and the good message that you have here. Yeah. And so we're going to pray together now. So you're going to direct your prayers into this tobacco that I'm going to hold right here for you. Keep your hand on your heart. You can keep your eyes closed if you want. Go ahead and put your hands toward me. Another deep breath. That fourth song I sang is a gratitude song. Right? Gratitude is the wings of prayer. And through gratitude, we launch our prayers and appreciate every single moment, every precious moment that we have on this earth, because the truth of existence is impermanence. we don't have forever on this planet. And so we're grateful for every moment that we're alive and have an opportunity to learn and grow and heal and be of service. So again, I thank you for the gift of being here, for your attention, your presence, your participation in your prayers tonight. And for us to conclude in thanking the spirits and sending them back home, in prayer, and to invoke them again in times of tribulation and triumph. And we're going to pray with my flute here, and just to feel the blessings so that we can allow peace into our hearts, that we can have the reflection of peace in the world. Because all the wars that are being waged are a consequence of the wars that we internally wage. Right? It's a reflection of that. So when we can make peace with ourselves and truly appreciate who we are, right? Flaws and all, right? Accept the whole pie, not just the pieces that are comfortable, right? Then we move into deeper peace, equanimity, tranquility, and that will ripple into our relationships and into the world. So go ahead and close your eyes again. You can take your hands to your heart or your belly. So again, I want to thank each and every one of you for your presence, your respect, your participation in your prayers tonight. I pray that this has been meaningful and potent and important for you, particularly as we journey into this solar eclipse. And I look forward to further conversations and collaborations. And I know we have a little bit more to go in terms of your own questions for myself, as well as anyone from our audience here this evening. So, many blessings to you and your loved ones. Aho, mitago yasi.
I'm so super grateful for that beautiful ceremony. And I have a few reflections I'd like to share of my personal experience before moving forward with questioning you. Mm-hmm. I just want to share that, like, the way that you present and offer is, in my experience, like a regenerative experience. And it was so, like, life-giving, and the experience of inspiration, like in a visceral experience. Mm. And I don't usually feel that way receiving. And it was really potent and powerful. And I'm I'm super grateful that you were guided to share your voice with us in this way tonight.
Well, thank you for that reflection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like so much great stuff was said, but I wanted to revisit this idea of decolonizing our mind or our internal complex of that.
Mm-hmm.
And to me personally, like the colonization is the separation that we witness relationally or interpersonally, but also in relationship to the mother.
Mm-hmm.
And so in my practice, I am putting mindful and courageous intent to rekindling connection and unity. And that's in my own process of alchemizing judgments that are externalized and also the way that I honor the earth and her elements.
Mm-hmm.
But I did want you to expand a little bit around this colonization that is within our current circuitry and how we can begin now to expand awareness around this, especially if this is a new idea for people.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, beautifully well expressed as well. So, as I said, inside of us is this intrinsic indigeneity. And through our educational practices, for example, there's actually a deification of the mind, right? We tend to really focus upon our rationality. And, for myself, I much prefer, just as with our prayer in the heart, that we live from the heart, right? Because the heart is the compass, right? So we look at, for many indigenous people, we use the sacred hoop of life, aka the medicine wheel, as a navigational tool. Well, our heart is that compass. It is the medicine wheel. It is that sacred hoop of life, right? There are 4 chambers, there are 4 directions, right? And then, of course, you have the sky and the earth. So if we learn how to live from our heart and also honor instinct and feeling rather than purely rationality, right, then we begin to touch back into our humanity again, right? So it's about placing the being back in human, right? Because we've forgotten our humanity. We've really forgotten how to be human beings, right? So by instilling that sense of beingness again into our humanity, we'll begin to tap back in and rewire that circuitry, right? And actually reawaken the circuitry that's already there, that's kind of been eclipsed by Western colonized thinking.
Yeah, I super appreciate that expansion. And to me, those attributes that you just described of feeling and intuition and following that through a close listening, I would describe or categorize that as feminine attributes. And I'm curious if you connect to that at all versus the intellect and the logic being more masculine attributes, and if that is at all present in these indigenous life ways that you're involved with.
Well, I want to be careful because if we get caught in polarities, for me that's still Western colonized thinking, right? So the qualities that you've ascribed to the feminine actually are ubiquitous. They actually exist within all human beings. So I try to be careful about categorizing particular qualities that are feminine or masculine or other gendered, right, or other identitied. That way we're kind of moving away from, that way we can embrace everything, right? Because in our society there are very strict regulations and rules about who is allowed to feel, who is not, so I'm a part of men's circles as well, and the reality is that all men can cultivate sensitivity as well, and they already are sensitive, and I think there's a conditioning that goes on within our society that continues to perpetuate stereotypes that are ultimately not going to serve us. So personally, I tend not to ascribe a particular quality or set just to one gender or identity.
Totally. I wanted to bring that in because I knew you would lead us there. And as being in this male body in this incarnation, you've been courageous and chosen a very radical pathway. And I want to better understand how 30 or 40 years ago you were likely initiated or brought into this through some pretty extreme circumstance, is what I'm feeling.
Yep.
So I want to hear more about that.
So my initiation onto the path. So I started having dreams when I was 6 years old. And they're regarded as big medicine dreams, as I learned later from my elders, right? So I was being visited by ancestors in my dreams, right? And then I was actually born in Los Angeles, and then my father, who was a neuroscientist, he was doing brain plasticity studies, cutting edge back in the 60s and 70s, and so he was given a new appointment in upstate New York, in Rochester, and so he moved the whole family to the East Coast. And my first experience of snow, my father and I, we went on a father-son trip with these other fathers and sons in what was called Indian guides back then. And it was a sledding excursion. And so we didn't have a sled, so we borrowed a sled from another family. And I was insistent on going down the hill by myself. And my father was quite reserved about that. He didn't want me to do that, quite resistant. But I really insisted. I saw these other, boys my age going down, and so I pleaded with him, and he acquiesced. And so I put my belly on what's called a rapid flyer, which is a wooden sled that you lie on top of with runners at the top, with metal runners underneath that you steer with your hands. Well, we didn't know that it was rusted, right? It couldn't maneuver. So I put my belly on it, and I careened down this hill at full speed, and I was heading right for a tree. And of course, I'd never been on a sled before. I was afraid of rolling off and being struck by other boys on either side of me. And I didn't think about driving my snow boots into the snow. And so I hit the tree at full speed. And the only thing that prevented me from actually dying was I covered my head at the last minute. But I made full impact. And at that point, my spirit was jettisoned from my body. And I was floating in a thick, black, viscous substance is all I could describe it as, right? But there was palpable movement. And then all of a sudden I heard my name. It was all muffled though, almost from behind me. And I felt a tentacle of energy wrap around my solar plexus and yank me back into my body. And I opened my eyes. Everything was really fuzzy. But I saw these faces of men, right, the fathers who were looking at me, and then I passed out and I came back up, and they created a makeshift gurney out of blankets and sticks, and they took me up the hill, and they slid me in the back of a old paneled station wagon, as I remember, and they raced me to the hospital. And I saw my father upset with the charge nurse to try to get me in, and I remember being slumped over, and I see blood just dripping down onto my lap and into the chair, and apparently I had blood emanating from every orifice of my face, ears, eyes, nose, mouth, and I had lacerated my cheek. And so they brought me in, and I passed out again, and I came back to with the pull of a cold needle through my cheek, and they were doing something called plastic surgery for the first time. And so I had this gaping gash, but I only have a little scar now because it worked. But anyhow, I lost the ability to walk. My semicircular canals were completely disrupted, so my stability was off, so I was bedridden, and at which point I was able to see spirits in ordinary time, right? It was not just in my dreams, which was really terrifying because I also couldn't speak, right? So I couldn't share with my parents what was happening to me, so it was a form of madness. Fortunately, though, the spirits that I've been working with, they came in and they parsed away all the other spirits so that I could at least function. And then made my way back to school and, had a lot of, some cognitive difficulties, integrating back into, scholastic endeavors. But finally, with the help of the spirits, I was able to stabilize. And looking at the literature from around the world anthropologically, both from medicine people as well as from shamans, because not everyone is a shaman. We can talk about that in a moment if you like. But there are initiations that are life-threatening. That's usually the call for that person to embark on the healing path. And so that's kind of a brief Reader's Digest version of my initiation into this way of life. And so from 7 to 17, I was trained in my dreams by the spirits. And then when I was 17, I made a formal commitment to walk this path as I was introduced to medicine people.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing. And I felt that experience you described of being pulled back into your body, and seemingly how strong and purposed this incarnation is, that this big tragedy, like even throughout that, you were pulled back in to continue this life.
Mm-hmm.
And I was also feeling your father and what he went through with that.
Certainly,
It's a
yeah.
lot.
There was absolute terror, apparently.
Yeah.
They said that he didn't even touch the snow. He was just racing so fast that, his feet didn't even touch the snow.
Yeah,
So,
I can imagine it.
yeah.
And I would like to tune into your, I don't know how to describe it even. Your description, it seems beyond perspective or understanding of shamanism. And in my personal curiosity, I wonder if we can embody qualities that are involved with shamanism without needing to identify as shaman.
Beautifully said. So, the word shaman comes from the Tungus people of Siberia. And there was a man by the name of Mircea Eliade, right? He wrote a book called Shamanism. And he spent time with the people of the Asian Siberian steppe. And he was a doctor of philosophy or religion, right? And so, unfortunately, kind of like a whitewash, he ascribed and described all indigenous peoples that have similar ways of connection to the earth and medicine ways as shamans, right? But technically, the only individuals who can truly call themselves shamans, because it's based on language, culture, cosmology, and specific ceremonial practices, the people of the Asian Siberian steppe. They are the true practitioners and have the right to call themselves shamans, right? Also, if you have trained with them, right? So people say, are you a shaman? I say, no, because I have not trained with the people of the Asian Siberian steppe, right? And so, unfortunately, so in Lakota medicine ways, in the medicine ways of Africa, I've traveled all over the world and have collaborated and communicated with fellow chiefs and medicine people and elders and wisdom keepers, and each culture has their own words to describe their medicine people, right? There's at least 7 words in the Lakota language for the different medicine ways of the practitioners, right? Like in Africa as well, they have Sangoma, Nyanga, Sanusi, so they have specific categories and names as well. So, and shaman isn't one of them, right? So to call themselves a shaman from another culture would be disrespectful toward the Asian Siberian steppe people, right? And so that's also part of the decolonization process, so decolonizing shamanism, right? Because sometimes people will take a workshop on shamanism and then they call themselves a shaman, right? Rather than going through the initiation of working with the Asian Siberian steppe or, the initiations of other medicine people and getting the proper designation from that nation or culture.
I feel curious then to ask you about chief and what are the core qualities in this current representation and embodiment as chief?
Yeah. So within indigenous governance, you are basically recognized as a leader by the people, right? So it's not a word I use to describe myself, but that, there was a very serious vetting process. There was a whole council of other chiefs that determined whether I was worthy to, lead and guide the people, right? And so, if any of those chiefs said that I was not, right, worthy, then, that title and that role and that responsibility would not have been conferred. So, and that's part of the checks and the balances in the system, right? So it isn't a democratic system, Because in a democracy, which in the United States is kind of an experiment, right, you have a polarization still, right? So it's still a colonized system of polarities that creates potential for great conflict, right? So, someone could be elected with 51% of the vote, which means you have 49 dissenters, right? 49% who are dissenting and not agreeing that this person should receive that title of president, for example, right? But it's consensus within indigenous cultures. So everyone must concur. There has to be absolute full agreement and accord, otherwise they can't proceed. So, when we sit in council or, we're trying to converse about an issue, sometimes this is going to take much longer because consensus requires more time, basically.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm experiencing personal epiphany as you describe these involvements that you're in, because just me personally, having a collaborative relationship with people that I am relating to in any degree is of my highest value and priority. And I often need to invite people into that dimension of relating because it isn't default of the world currently. Correct. So I appreciate you sharing that, and I imagine that requires, in some moments, fortitude and patience and a very deep surrender, sometimes even of personal preference, perhaps.
Yeah, we're talking about finesse and skill, right? Because it's also the ground of peacemaking and reconciliation, right? So, there's a whole ceremonial protocol around how we achieve peace in the world, right? And of course, this isn't certainly being played out in the global arena, which it should right now, right? I would really love if indigenous grandmothers all over the world went to Ukraine and Russia and Palestine and began to communicate with men, basically, who are still caught in antiquated paradigms of conquest and extraction and exploitation.
We have a lot to pray for.
As my Lakota mother would always say, she was in an incessant state of prayer. In her latter years, she never slept. She would just pray. Wow. Yeah, she passed on the res at 92 years of age. So. Yeah.
That may even be a higher vibrational resonance of rest.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Well, sure, it's communion, right? Direct communion, direct transmission all the time.
That's fascinating.
Being nourished by the source constantly.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, I know...
She would say every step of prayer. That was her motto.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. And I notice you have your instruments and your feather and some adornments on your body. And is there anything you would like to share about how you've come to this current collection?
Yeah, so a lot of the medicine objects I've received have been gifts, right? So, people have expressed gratitude, right? So going back to reciprocity, and one of the things that we do in indigenous cultures is that we're careful about, there's no charge financially for ceremony, right? Because when we charge money for ceremony, we're creating a stratification economically, right? Of people who can afford it and those who cannot. So we have what are called open altars. So people are welcome to come and pray regardless of what their financial situation is, right? And so sometimes as a consequence of the ceremony or the healing that I perform, people will provide reciprocity, right? Not only in form of a donation, right? We can't put a specific charge on things, but also they may give me a gift. So a lot of the items that comprise my altar, for example, have been gifts. Like this feather was a gift, from someone who appreciated my medicine and how I supported them in their journey. And that applies for, the drum that I received, the rattle. All of these things have been gifts to me, right? And same with some of the adornments here as well.
And I can imagine you have gifted many things as well. Yeah.
That's the reciprocity. Things flow, right? So there's actually, in the Pacific Northwest coast, there's a ceremony that was banned by the federal government in Canada called the potlatch, right? The potlatch ceremony is where, whether it be celebratory ceremony or perhaps a grieving ceremony or acknowledging the death of a loved one, you give everything away, right? And so what it does is it allows for that emptiness, right? Which allows for the blessings of more receptivity down the road, right? And it also allows for the circulation of goods and services through a family and a community, right? So therefore, in our culture, poverty consciousness creates this compelling urge to grasp, hold on to things in fear, versus learning how to let go and surrender, right? So in this way, you let things go, and then you trust that things will come back, right? That's the universal flow through a community, right? And that allows also objects to take on a new life of their own, right? So if the way I operate is that if I don't remember the story of the item and how I received it, then I will give it away so it takes on a new life.
New story.
New story, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. Appreciate that a lot. And I feel it to be timely for the eclipse, for the spring season, like that reminder that there are perhaps things in our life that are ready for a new story. Mm-hmm. And I want to, lastly for myself, tune into the Ancestral Voice Institute. Mm-hmm. And when I hear institute, I assume that to mean a space where people are being expanded in some like educational or experiential capacity. Mm-hmm. And so I want to know more about what that involves and what's active for you.
Yeah. So Ancestral Voice offers many ceremonies, right? In fact, that's really, the ground of our work is, Ancestral Voice. Our mission is to preservation and protection and respectful dissemination of Indigenous ways of life. And so we conduct many ceremonies constantly throughout the month. There's also what I call intensives, right? So day-long weekend intensives where there's an immersion of the expansion, if you will, right? So there's a transmission of teachings around Indigenous healing ways. In fact, last weekend we just had a 2-day intensive on fearlessness, how to walk fearlessly in the world. And so, of course, we are utilizing Indigenous wisdom and Indigenous practices as the foundation, for transmitting this information. And there's apprenticeships, so we have what I call the Indigenous Lifeways program, so people can train with me anywhere from 1 year up to 17 years. And of course, each one of those will determine what they're qualified to be able to do in the future. But that's also a ground for people to learn how to decolonize and also to learn the skills of being a practitioner of Indigenous ways.
Yeah, very cool. That's amazing. I'm really celebrating specifically whomever has been alongside you for 17 years and just honoring that is also the reciprocity of like you continuing to teach and support those who are coming after you.
Certainly. Well, I turned 60 years of age last year, and legacy is a part of that understanding around eldership, right? That's one of the responsibilities of eldership is to transmit the knowledge and the wisdom and the teachings and the practices to future generations because, again, impermanence is the name of the game and here on this planet. So, I don't know how much longer I have. And so therefore, I want to make sure that there are people that can carry that torch into the future with proper qualification, and sanction and training, right? And so, yeah, that's part of our goal, is to keep these traditions alive, but also to ensure that there is the adherence to protocol, etc. So we're not trying to fabricate things, right? That we're really honoring lineages as it's been passed to me through my mentors and teachers, because the sacred hoop of life has been spinning. All we have to do is step on it. We don't have to recreate the wheel.
I certainly feel benefited and impacted by your presence and your transmission tonight and feel super appreciative. And there was so much amazing content in what was shared, and I also feel like the energetics are still landing for me. Mm-hmm. And it's just interesting to be sensitive of that in my own system. Yep. And I'm wanting to turn to the audience and see who may have any other questions or curiosities. And if you do, we're going to hand you the mic for our online audience. We're integrating.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because that's actually another buzzword in psychedelic, communities and therapies, is that we have this integration. And oftentimes that's the case because we're not living in a ceremonial context all the time, right? So we're living more in the profane world, right? And so we have these profound experiences. Maybe we participate in an ayahuasca ceremony or a Native American church ceremony. And because it's outside the context of our ordinary way of life, then this integration is really important. But for Indigenous people, because it's woven into the matrix of their living, often there isn't that integration that's necessary, right? Because it's so much a part of the day-to-day, right? And again, I'm not dismissing the need for integration, right? But, this is where often I will share that, for the next 4 days, right, after the ceremony, you want to be gentle and kind with yourself, right? That you want to not engage in any sort of strife or conflict, right? Which can kind of disrupt the system, right? So we're moving into, there's been a discharge, right? There's been an ease within your nervous system now, right? And a nourishment of your spirit. And so you want to continue to nurture that, right? And then after 4 days, there's what we say is there's, whether it be a ceremony like this or whether it be with plant medicines, your awareness shifts, right? And then it takes a while, and so there's a vibrational change, right? You're vibrating differently. And it takes about 4 days for the body to catch up, right? And we know that to be true because when you travel internationally, right, there's something called jet lag, right? Well, jet lag is the phenomenon of your body traveling and your spirit has to catch up, right? That's why it takes about a week, right? Most people, if they travel internationally, then there's a lag, right, before they really feel fully present. And that's because their body has traveled through space and time, but the spirit may have been left behind inadvertently, right? And what we learn is how to make sure that your energy body and your physical body coalesce together, right? So, like when I travel to Mongolia, when I travel to Bali, I hit the tarmac running because I make sure that my energy body is accompanying me during my whole travel, right? Not to mention asking the spirits to also help me with that, right? So people say, we'll take a day of rest. Like, I don't need it. I'm ready to go because I'm here, fully present, right? So in this way, it's just the opposite. We've actually accelerated your energy body, right? Your luminosity, right? Your cocoon, your energy cocoon, as we call it, right, has been amplified, right? And it's now vibrating at a different frequency. And now it takes about 4 days for the physical body to catch up to this new vibrational state. So 4 days. Kind and gentle, no strife, no conflict, preciousness. And that also means, right, if we're looking at consumption, being careful about your relationship to technology too, right? Because if we want to look at health from not only a point of view of the body in terms of what we are consuming food-wise, nourishment-wise, we also have to understand to be very vigilant about how we're consuming media and technology as well. Yeah.
I'd like to add to that as well, an awareness of that energy we are in that process of consumption. And like for myself, I can contract in fear and make consumptive choices from that contraction, which is not actually supportive to my vitality or wellness. And so being aware of when I am moving from that contracted place and not shaming myself for being there, but softening and having compassion for that aspect so I can hold more open energy in my discernment, even if I'm still making the same choice, just having an awareness of that coalescence of energy body, physical body, mind body.
And as you said, tracking our consumption. So that's about, we have to be good hunters, basically, right? And being a hunter means you're tracking your patterns, right? So in traditional societies, hunters and gatherers, right, they're examining their behaviors in relationship to the animals they may be stalking, right? So you learn to track the animal, you know what their habits are, the repetitions that they engage in. Well, we have to do that for ourselves too, right? And so when we track ourselves, then we become aware of our patterns and addictions, and then we can change them, right? So looking at the foods we consume, the way that we relate to technology, to our cell phones. For me, that's the most disconcerting, is that, I go out to dinner and I see people on their phones rather than engaging as we are, conversing, and, for me that becomes part of the pattern in the addiction that actually creates isolation and separation rather than unity.
I'm like having this experience of like wanting to say like it is a pleasure to witness and to be witnessed by you, and like this is a very real experience. Like as we're sharing gaze, like I feel the energy flow that you're available for in your own body, and like how that is being extended to me and to us. And so I just want to be authentic with that real experience for myself, and it truly is a pleasure.
Indeed. And I appreciate, your mastery and your sensitivity, right? I enjoyed our conversation prior to this evening, and your sensitivity and your awareness, and it's been a pleasure as well on my end.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Is there anything else that you would like to share before we close out tonight, or any way that you would like to close out?
Well, perhaps if you're all open, I can share another song, right, for us to conclude. I want to acknowledge my wife in the spirit world. She passed away, and I was widowed at the age of 35, and she walked this path with me. And she was visiting our Lakota mother on the res when she was involved in a fatal vehicular accident. And so her favorite song was a thank you song. And so I would really appreciate being able to share the song with you tonight, as I've really relished our time here together, and being able to share this way of life, for us. And that's always, she was also instrumental in helping to birth Ancestral Voice into existence, and we celebrate our 30th year anniversary of our child of Ancestral Voice now. And so allowing her voice to be acknowledged through her appreciation and her love of the thank you song, I would be an honor. And as I sing this song, maybe you also have prayers of gratitude, right? Things that you are grateful for. You can express those as well, right? And I think it's also important that we understand that adversity is the springboard for awakening. And so whatever our challenges are is also the way that we can heal, right? So our challenges are our greatest teachers. And so it's important that we're grateful for our adversities and for our difficulties and our hardships, because that tempers us. It actually helps us, like stepping into the fire, right? So that we can be transformed and that we can transcend, our circumstances. It creates resiliency, it creates flexibility, and that's an adaptability that's essential for our survival. So we want to acknowledge our adversities as what really creates the strength of who we are and our character. So this is for my beloved wife, Cecilia, in the spirit world. as we say in Lakota, when we conclude our songs and our prayers, we say Mitakuye Oyasin, which means all of my relations. We are all family. So thank you again. It's been an honor to share with your community, and I look forward to future conversations and ceremonies in the future. I pray that you all have safe travels back to your home. Bring this good medicine back to your loved ones, and please be safe. Taumatakuyas.